welcome to our second ever live stream here directly on YouTube. My name is Felix Bartels. Thank you for joining us. Today we want to talk a bit about different use cases for Kopano Konnect. And Kopano Konnect is the component that we choose to implement our authentication for new clients for. And it's using the OpenID Connect standard, here then with a C, not with a K, which is like, at least in our belief, the open answer to all those closed source systems like login with Google, login with Facebook. And OpenID Connect is actually quite similar to these systems. And how similar I want to show you in this webinar, where we talk a bit about the theoretics behind OpenID Connect. And afterwards, I'm going to tell you and show you how to install Kopano Konnect on your existing Kopano system and how to configure additional applications like Kopano web app or another third-party component, how to use the authentication from Kopano Konnect to log in. Yeah, but a bit of marketing first. That's you have to give me. Yeah, so for those that are not really familiar with Kopano, we have our roots here in the groupware section, and we want to provide you basically with your self-hosted Office 365 setup, which means that on top of groupware, and for groupware we see those classic fields and topics of email, calendaring, contacts. We want to provide you a complete platform to do, for example, document management and document editing. We have our own components, namely Kopano Meet for web meetings, Kopano Meet, that was the topic of our last webinar, is a so-called progressive web app that allows you to do video calls both on your desktop and on mobile devices. And the speciality about these progressive web apps is that they're complete web-based, don't require any installation of additional clients, which means that you can do as web meeting and screen sharing on your desktop without having to install any plugins. And if you like, and this again is one of the major benefits of progressive web apps, they allow you to easily install a link to this application, so your user has easy and direct access to the application then when he needs it the next time. Another section in the real-time communication platform is messaging, and here we are currently supporting installations and making installations of MetaMost easier, but here we are of course very open to other messaging solutions as well. And all your groupware is nothing without the clients. And here for the client perspective, we have both our Kopano web app, which is a classic web-based client using JavaScript to make the interaction more pleasing. But since people and users really rely and want to have a desktop application, we also have the Kopano desk app, which can be installed on many different platforms like Windows, OS X, OS 10 and Linux, to give you a more desktop look and feel and to give you some additional integration. And of course, mobile phones, mobile devices are omnipresent in our world today. So we also have the possibility to connect these mobile phones to your classic groupware data. For that, we're using the project ZPush, which was initiated by us as well, to give you a direct and deep integration in your mobile phones through the ActiveSync protocol. And what we want to talk about today, like I already said, is OpenID Connect. And yeah, as you are probably aware, today everyone is talking about apps. And so you have a groupware app like Capano, you have something for chat, you have your IT ticketing, wikis, and all these apps need to be integrated into your IT landscape. And this is quite easy if those applications are on your premises and can directly be connected through an LDAP protocol, for example. But this gets increasingly more difficult if your applications are not all in the same place. Like, for example, you could have an application that is running in a data center because you have a lot of external users to it. And for these, you may not want to bridge your LDAP into that data center. So you have to be a bit more creative how to get this connection established and how to bring your users there to this external data center. And the software as a service world and the modern web world then came up with this login with, which is still quite popular, and which basically allows then for a web-based login. But again, you have all these applications. How can you easily manage all these applications? How, if you don't want to trust an external authentication provider like Google, like Facebook, with your identity, with your users' identities, how can you survive in that world, basically? And the idea, and that's the nice thing about these kind of so-called social logins, is that they are all based on one common standard. So there is this OpenID Connect standard that is used in basically all these external providers that are linked here, like Facebook, Google, Twitter, and OpenID Connect as a standard is even something that originally came from these big corporations. So it's built upon OAuth 2.0, and the first version of OAuth was actually developed together by Twitter and Google. So the idea here is that instead of directly talking to your authentication provider, the client where you're logging in, the so-called relying party, basically sends a request to your OpenID provider, which is your login provider. And that ID provider then says, oh yeah, I already have a session for you, so you can directly log in. Or if there is no session already, then the ID provider directly redirects you to a login form, basically. And once that authentication is then established, the relying party, the web application where you log in, just gets a token to verify, hey, yeah, this user is logged in, he can use these services, and the relying party itself doesn't need to, so it's usually is aware of your username, but for example, is not aware or has never seen the password of that user, because all that is handled here in the with the OpenID provider. And with that token, basically, the relying party then can talk to the backend, like for example here the token endpoint and the user info to get some additional information of your user, like for example these applications. Basically, you all know it if you have ever used a login to log in with Facebook somewhere. You get then after login you get a consent screen, and in that consent screen you say, okay, this application is allowed to see my username, is allowed to see my email address, and other optional attributes where you can say for each of them, yes, he is allowed to, or he isn't. And the nice thing about OpenID as a standard as well is that these providers have can be auto-configured. So in your application, you still need, in most cases at least, you still need to say you want to use OpenID Connect, and you have to manually configure your OpenID provider. But all the dirty work of configuring these services can be automated in the sense that the OpenID provider can deliver a so-called discovery document, and from this discovery document, the application can configure itself for use with your OpenID provider. And in this discovery document, you can then already see what kind of scopes are supported, basically what kind of data the ID provider can provide, and how these tokens can be encrypted, and so on and so forth. Yeah, and like I already said in the first slide, OpenID Connect as a standard is something that has evolved on top of OAuth 2.0. And the main difference here is that OpenID Connect specifies and standardizes the way how to get actual user information. So you basically really, when an application says it is compatible with OpenID Connect, then it will work with any OpenID Connect provider. But when an application says it can support OAuth 2.0 as an authentication flow, you may still need to require some additional coding and mapping of attributes. So yeah, basically, if your application says, oh, I can already work with OpenID Connect, then you're good to go. Yeah, and basically, there are, of course, other methods of using single sign-on, and just because we for ourselves have chosen OpenID Connect, you may already have some sort of single sign-on provider like SAML or Kerberos in your internal environment. So we want to take a small look at how does OpenID Connect compare to these providers. So just to have it said again, so basically, if you want to log in as an application, you say, oh, I want to connect through OpenID Connect, or the configured name of your login provider, and you basically get back to your OpenID application, to Kopano Konnect, for example, and then you can log in there. And in the case of, for example, OpenID versus Kerberos, here the setup is a lot more difficult. So while in the world of OpenID Connect, you just have to make sure that the applications can talk to each other, have SSL certificates in place, and that they can communicate securely so that you have SSL certificates in place. In the case of using Kerberos or even NTLM, you have to make sure your application, your server, is joined into the domain, into the Windows domain that provides Kerberos. And also, so there are quite some additional heavy steps in IT infrastructure involved, in my opinion at least, to make an application compatible with Kerberos. So here, Kerberos versus OpenID Connect. In the OpenID Connect world, you just have to make sure that the web endpoints works, that the application is known, as trusted to your ID provider, and have to just fill in some steps, some configuration information in your application, and then you can already use OpenID Connect. And whereas with the Kerberos setup, some more steps and some more tight control needs to be given. And how easy it is to configure that, we're taking a look at in the second part of the webinar, when we're going to do a small live demo. And then there is SAML as a standard that is also already quite widely used. Both OpenID Connect and SAML are quite similar and solve some similar issues, with the one main differentiator that SAML as a standard is already quite older. It's an XML-based protocol, whereas OpenID Connect as an architecture and as a protocol is a lot simpler, because it's simple JSON with a REST-based interface to then get additional user information. And OpenID Connect also has the benefit. So in the case, both are quite similar. You just have to make sure that DNS records are in place, your systems can resolve each other, can talk with each other, and that communication can be done securely through HTTPS. But OpenID Connect also has the additional benefit that while SAML works only in a browser-based form, so just with applications that really work with a web interface, through the nature that you get a token basically just from OpenID Connect, you can also use this token in other kinds of applications, like you have a desktop application or have a native application on a mobile phone. you just have to give the token to the application, and you can then leave the browser behind. So that's one of the main big differences between SAML and OpenID Connect. And again, not only the communication, the protocol that OpenID is using is much simpler than the XML-based communication of SAML, but also in SAML, you can see here you have a trust relationship. You need to generate certificates, you need to sign certificates with each other. So the architecture, the configuration is quite heavy in my experience. Whereas a configuration of OpenID Connect or any other OpenID OAuth 2 provider is a lot more simpler. You can have in your OpenID Connect provider either do a so-called managed client registration, which is in most cases what you want to do, or OpenID as a standard even supports the so-called open or dynamic client registration, which is, for example, what is used if you're using projects such as ID4Me. So here, both the application and your login provider need to support a dynamic client registration, because in a federated login system, you cannot already know all the parties that are here involved. And if you're doing such so-called managed client registration, then you have inside of your application something that's quite similar to what you can see here in the screenshot. You basically need to then make your ID provider known to your system, that you have to give an application name. So basically something that your users can identify your login provider by. You need to give the URL where that application is. And then you have a callback URL. And basically you log in, and once that login is succeeded, you get back to this URL. And here again, the nice thing about OpenID Connect is, so it's not a new standard. It's already in the world for quite a while, for some years. And even though it's kind of the hidden hero, the unsung hero, it's widely used. So you saw it already in the first slide, that there's login with Facebook, login with Microsoft, with Office 365, and so on. And all these platforms are basically using OpenID Connect as the base for their application. Apple recently launched or I'm not quite sure if they really have launched yet, or at least they made known that they have plans to bring this login with your Apple ID through to additional applications. And also that is based, at least in its core, on the OpenID standard, with some Apple typical exceptions built on top of that. But there, like I said, the standard has arrived. There are already many applications that bring support for these kind of social login. Popular supported applications include, for example, WordPress, or like you probably already know, we're quite deep into the Atlassian stack, meaning that we're using Jira and Bitbucket for the development of our software. And also these applications can be configured to support an OpenID provider instead of a login through GitHub. You can see that here basically, that you can say add a provider, and then you would configure your own OpenID provider. Or here, the middle screenshot comes from the e-learning platform Moodle, where you can also just configure a random or a custom, not a random, but a custom OpenID provider. And here the nice thing, which kind of also shows how closer Microsoft has grown to the open source community over the years, because the OpenID provider inside of Moodle is actually developed and maintained by Microsoft itself. And this is then here on the third screen. What you can see here is the small Git provider, your own self-hosted GitHub, basically Git T. And I want to show you in the second half, in a few slides, how this can also be configured to work with OpenID as with OpenID as a login provider. Yeah. And the solution, and this is what we're going to look at. So there are, of course, a lot of different OpenID providers that you can integrate and that you can install on your system. But the one that I'm going to tell you a bit about is our own product, Kopano Konnect. Kopano Konnect is what we see as a painless OpenID provider, meaning that it's a Go binary, that it's very easy to install, doesn't bring that many dependencies. In fact, it doesn't require you to use any databases or whatever. It's really just a Go binary, brings its web interface and can be easily exposed to the internet. Kopano Konnect brings its own web login and consent form. So with other OpenID providers, you may need to create your own forms for that. Konnect already brings that out of the box. And yeah, it's already said, it's written in Golang. It has a very small front end written in React. So even if you want to, and this is actually what has been done at the Univention, they have taken our OpenID provider, Kopano Konnect, made their own React front end in front of it. So then you don't see the Capano sign in with your Kopano account, but you can see sign in with Univention. And something that also comes in handy for the Univention use case is that with the default configuration, Kopano Konnect connects against the Kopano server backend. In the default configuration, Kopano Konnect connects against the Kopano server. So whatever you have configured for your users inside of Kopano will be able to log in with Konnect. But you can also directly connect, if you're not running Kopano, you can connect Kopano Konnect against an LDAP server to manage and retrieve your users from there. I'm hoping the stream still works. I get an error message here that the stream may not be as fluent. Yeah, how do you install Kopano Konnect? Kopano Konnect is available both as, of course, source code and directly binary releases that we, and these binary releases is what we use to also build Docker images from, build Debian and RPM packaging. And like I already mentioned, Kopano Konnect is available as an app already on the Univention corporate server. So there you don't really search for Kopano Konnect, but you search for OpenID provider, but you will get then the same application that you have, that you get with our other channels. And to show you how to install Kopano Konnect on a Debian platform, I'm now going to switch over to screen sharing to basically show you the in and outs of the system. So what I have here is a very basic installation. I think it's an Ubuntu LSB_release small a. It's an Ubuntu 18.04 system, already installed with our latest Kopano release. Oops, that was the wrong. Coming with Kopano 8.7.5, and I have a bunch of users already installed on the system. Sorry, list users. Basically what we get here internally on our own test farm. So when I switch over to my login, I have a Kopano web app and I can log in with my users here. And I have my inbox. And if you want to have your Kopano already installed and want to install Kopano Konnect, everything that you basically need to do, and it comes with the same repository, with the same download archive as the rest of our Kopano core server stack. All you need to do is to do an apt-get install Kopano Konnect D. In my case, it's already installed, but I still wanted to show you how easy it is. Then the next step is basically that you need to configure your web server for it. In my case, I already have this here pre-set up with so it's enabled Kopano with Nginx, that I have my upstream configuration. It's by the way something that you will find in our documentation on exactly how this can be done. And then we have our I have it here in that case hidden in an extra configuration file. I have my different endpoints that are then proxied through to the Kopano Konnect itself. If you want to have an even easier setup, and you will find a direct explanation for that also in our configuration, then in our documentation, then you could install Kopano kwebd, which gives you a more out-of-the-box, more easier setup experience, because here you just really need to configure your own host name. You can, or if you want to, it's recommended, you could configure, you need to enter your email address here, and once Kopano kweb knows the host name and the email address, it can then retrieve an SSL certificate automatically from Let's Encrypt for that system. So the SSL setup is there, and you can access and can securely access your system. But there is of course also the possibility, if you already have SSL certificates, have wildcard certificates, for example, for your whole domain, or if you're running a system that's not publicly accessible, you can also in here configure an SSL certificate for your own use. So you don't need to use Let's Encrypt if you do not want to. So that would make the setup for Konnect even easier. There is a bit of configuration that you need to do inside of Kopano Konnect before you can use it the first time. And let me quickly dive into the configuration file, or one step back. So this is our standard configuration file, and the general configuration for Konnect is here, the Konnect d.cfg. For securely talking and signing keys, Konnect creates some secret keys, some private keys for you automatically at start, so you don't have to take care of that yourself. And that's also all stored in etc Kopano. And you have a scopes registration, which is basically what I showed you in that in the presentation here in our discovery document, what kind of scopes are supported. So you could also add some custom scopes to that. And we have our identifier registration, which is not created by default, but if you have applications that are not running on the same domain as your ID provider, then you need to create this file and register these clients in there. And I'm going to show you in a moment how this file needs to look when you want to register Git as a Git provider for that. But first, back to Kopano Konnect configuration. So here, what you need to configure here is, for one part, the domain under which Kopano Konnect is reachable. This is because this is then also, like you can see here, so this is the issuer, the same value that you can find here in the discovery document, and all the endpoints have the issuer, have your domain prefixed as well. So it's quite important that Konnect knows how to reach itself, because this information is used in the discovery document and therefore is used for applications that want to connect to Konnect. So you need to give your host name here, including HTTPS. And in my case, it's felix-webinar.lxd.kopano.lan, which is simply our internal domain setup for that. And if you're running internally or running in a demo environment where you're not having all officially and valid and trusted SSL certificates, you can here also could have the possibility to make Konnect accept these unsecure, unvalidated SSL certificates. So in a production environment, you of course should leave this at its default setting no. But if you know you have an application and you want to test something in a test environment, then you can quickly switch this over to yes, which makes then Kopano Konnect accept these connections. And that's basically already what you need to configure here inside of Kopano Konnect. And if you have done so, you can just do a Kopano systemctl restart Kopano Konnect D. And then you already have, like you could already see here, this discovery document. And if you go to /signin/v1/identifier, you see this login screen where you could already log in with your Kopano credentials. But to actually make use of your Kopano login, you also need to do some additional configuration for Kopano server itself, which is what I'm showing you now. So inside of the Kopano server configuration, and this is something that you find if you're running at least Kopano 8.7.0, you will find a section called OIDC, OpenID Connect settings in your configuration file. And what you want to do here is that you need to uncomment this KC OIDC issuer identifier. And what you want to put into this field is then again the URL under which Kopano can reach the OpenID provider, can reach Konnect. And again here, if you're in a test environment and you're not running with all trusted certificates, you can also say here you want to skip insecure certificates. You should not do that. Let me stress that in a production environment, but since I'm here in a testing environment and have not all trusted certificates, this is something that I have to do, sadly, or I don't have to do with a lot of extra work that could also be prevented. And the last extra step that you need to do is that you need to tell Kopano server that if someone logs in with a single sign-on token, basically that if someone comes along and wants to log in into Kopano with a token that has been generated by Konnect, and if Kopano server should allow this login, then you also need to configure the setting enable SSO and switch it over to yes, so that Kopano server knows, hey, I have to allow these connections and I have to validate these connections. So let's store that configuration and do a restart of Kopano server. Okay, and then we're now going to configure our very first client for Kopano Konnect for login with OpenID. So we already have here our web app and with the login screen, and you could see here I can it's the trusted and known Kopano login mask, and I can log in here, and then I have that traditional login to Kopano web app. But you can also use OpenID Connect for that. And the nice thing here, if you use OpenID Connect to log into web app, is that if you have other applications that are using OpenID Connect, then by having the user sign in once into Kopano web app, the user has a session at your OpenID provider, which means that other applications that can log in with this ID provider already have a session as well. So let's configure our web app for login. So we have to go to etc Kopano web app and have to go into our config PHP, which is the main configuration file of web app. And then we just scroll a bit down here into the block that is called OIDC server configuration. And here again, we need to configure our issuer, which is with HTTPS, again, the host name that our system was using. So I'm going to paste that in. And for clients also always have a so-called client ID. And the client ID is something that you specify in the manual registration. But since both web app and Connect share the same domain, so it's running on the same fully qualified domain name, I don't need to register this client because it's then automatically trusted because it has the same address. So someone that is living at the same house number than you is someone you automatically trust, right? So you just put in a random client ID. I'm just putting here web app. And then you have here these scopes, but you can leave them basically as they are. These are the minimum scopes that web app needs to know, needs a request from the OpenID provider. So I'm going to close and save that file. And if I now click here on reload, then instead of having the login mask of Kopano web app, I'm directly forwarded to the login mask of Kopano Konnect. So I'm instead logging in here, click on next, and then I'm back at web app and being logged into web app and have my session in web app. So this is already our very first client that is using the login with OpenID Connect. Yeah. And like I said, there are many other applications that support the login through OpenID Connect. There are, for example, plugins for Nextcloud and OwnCloud. But one small application, and small really in the sense of that is easy to show and easy to use, that I want to show you how to log in with OpenID Connect is the Git provider called Git-T. And with Git-T, you can go, once you have it installed on your system, you can go to site administration. Yeah, I'm running, that's one of the applications that are using a self-signed certificate. And that's why I needed to have this insecure mode. And here you can configure so-called Authentication Sources. And I've already created this one entry here before our webinar. But what you basically need to do here is that you can give your own authentication name, which can be the name of your company, can be Kopano. If you train your users that logging in with Capano is your own login. Or like I said, it can be your own company name. So you just choose authentication type OAuth2, and your OpenID provider, your OAuth2 provider is OpenID Connect. And then we have again this client ID. Remember, that was what inside of the Kopano web app configuration, we just put web app. So here we need to have our own unique identifier for it. And we can have a client secret, which we need to put in here, but that's something that at this time in Kopano Konnect we are not evaluating, not checking. And then we have here inside of Git-T the nice thing that instead of having to configure all the different endpoints, we can just point to our configuration document, our auto discovery URL, which is always and in any case .well-known/OpenID configuration, and through that git-t is then able to automatically map to the required endpoints. But just putting all the configuration here inside of git-t is not all. Since our git-t is running on a different domain, so it's still just felix-webinar.lxd.kopano.lan, but it's not using the default HTTP ports, but its own port, its own communication. Therefore, I need to register git-t as a client first inside of Connect. And that is something that we can easily do through the so-called identifier registration, where I'm here in my test setup already have two IDs. So I have one setup that is using has its own local ID and has one redirect ID that is using the GitLab authentication of some other application. But the important part here is the second part. So here I have a block with ID git-t, which is the one I have specified inside of git-t as well. It's a web type application, and I have to configure a redirect URI. And this is usually something that the other application tells you where to get that from. And I think I need to just say shortly add a new authentication so I can show you OpenID Connect. So we see here then with the tips, OAuth provider, here, callback URL. The callback redirect URL should be host user OAuth2, then the authentication name, which in my example is Kopano/callback. And this is basically what I have configured here. So I have HTTPS, I have my host name, and on port 3000, I have my git-t running /user/OAuth2/Kopano/callback, which is then, our redirect URI. Basically, my external application comes to Connect. Connect presents the login mask, and once the user has logged in, where should Connect redirect the user back to? This is what we define here. So I can now log out of git-t, and then hopefully, I'm just to have a login mask, I'm logging out of Connect as well. I can say here inside of git-t I want to sign in, and then I have here this sign in with OpenID Connect. If I log out of my OpenID provider, then of course the user session inside of web app expires as well. And this is what just happened. But back to our OpenID provider, so I say sign in, and then we have here this sign in with OpenID Connect, where I click to. It redirects me to my account, and then I can say I want to log in with user one. And then since it's running on a different domain, we get this consent screen. git-t wants to access my basic account information. Do I allow this? Yes, I want to allow it. And then I'm back at LinkedIn, and there seems to be an issue, probably because of the self-signed SSL certificate with the CSS. But here I can say, I want to link my account with an already known git-t user. And then that works, and I'm logged in. It's a bit strange. Let's try that again. let's do instead an additional account. So my user is called Jonas and has the email user1@pharma.lan, complete account. Email address is already used. That's a pity. Let's do it then different. Let's take a different user. Sign out. Sign in, and then I'm using user 2, not user 1. The good Timothy. So my username in git-t should be user 2, and my email address is user2@pharma.lan. Click on complete accounts, and then I should be able to log in, right? There I am with my user 2 inside of git-t. Okay, yeah. And then we're already at the end of our small webinar for today. If you want to learn more about Konnect, you can find the source code on in our GitHub account, github.com, and there you will find the user Kopano-dev/Konnect. And if you want to have a very, very easy test setup, test environment of Kopano, that also includes Konnect. Konnect includes our REST API and is already pre-configured for Kopano Meet. Then you can find here also in the account Kopano-dev a Git project called Kopano-docker, which is a very easy setup that you just need to clone locally. It has a small setup script, and then you basically in the end use Docker Compose to spin up a fully working Kopano test environment.